Everybody, and welcome to the February installment of the Policy Committee for Cincinnati Public Schools. We will have, before we conclude this meeting, a hearing of the public for anyone who would like to share. Rob, maybe we just do those instructions now. Would that be all right?
Yep. Good morning. If you'd like to speak during the speaking of the public session of the meeting, please click the hand icon. We ask your name and association of the district, and then at the end of the meeting, we'll invite you in to speak for 2 minutes. Thank you.
Great. So to give just an overview to our agenda this morning, when our policy committee met last year after Mr. Morosky stepped down, we put in place a kind of standing structure to our meetings, which the committee decided to keep in place then this calendar year. And so every time you join us, you should see the same couple of sections. We're going to start by making our way through our triannual review of all the policies in CPS, led by our counsel's office. Some months we may have quite a bit in that section. Some months we may have very little. We will then have a section where any board member can ask that our committee take up any issue that they would like. Our board staff, Phyllis, was very helpful in collecting requests that we cover over the first 6 months of 25. So you'll see those that are there. We won't talk about all of those this morning, but we'll make our way through them over the course of the 6 months. And then we have some space for anything we haven't finished, anything gets assigned to us from a board meeting, a little bit of flexibility space if we need it. We'll hear from anyone in the public who would like to share, and then we will conclude. So in that spirit, I think we can start with counsel's office for the item that we have on today's agenda.
Yeah, thank you. So actually on our standing policy review, we are now through all the employment policies. So we will start kind of with the next 3-year review section. I think it'll probably be either the 2000 section or I believe it's the 6000 section. But for today, we have one that is actually a carryover from the December meeting. Board member Mapp had made some suggestions to our district school community partnerships policy. That we did not get to this in the January meeting, but looking for the policy committee's approval to go forward on just a couple of changes to the district school community partnerships policy. The changes that board member Mapp suggested was that all partnerships should have a contract memorandum or a memorandum of understanding in place before services are rendered, that partnerships should be always in compliance with our conflict of interest policy, and that schools must ensure that consent forms are in place for students participating in partner programming.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I would just add that I think you summarized that very well. And so just open it up for comments from Board Member Lindy or Board Member Weinberg to add any additional feedback. As General Counsel stated, this is a carryover from our previous meeting.
Mrs. Weinberg, anything on your end?
I don't have anything to add. I do appreciate, thank you, Board Member Mapp, for bringing this up and adding the additions, especially, the ability to have the consent forms on file and making sure that we have those filled out, etc. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Nothing additional to me on substance, just on process.
Mm-hmm.
Is this ready to go forward?
Yes.
Great. Would you like to see it in the consent agenda? Would you like to see it listed separately?
I think this is an item for the consent agenda.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Either seems great to me.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on that front, council, that you would like to?
No, great. That's what we needed.
Great. Okay. So as we move to section 3 on topics submitted by board members, my suggestion would be, I don't have maybe that Kendra, you or Mrs. Weinberg have some context on the entries that came from Dr. Moffat. I do not yet. If you do have some, let's talk about them this morning. If you don't, I think we could tee them up for March. Because we frankly had I think we had something like 10 last year, and we have like 3 now. And we have Mrs. Weinberg, and so we could do that third bullet this morning. And then we could come back to 1 and 2, unless did either of you know more about what Dr. Moffat wants us to take up?
So I am not particularly certain at the moment, so I think it would be helpful for her to maybe provide some context. I do think for I guess just maybe for the immigration policies, just given the fact that there's been obviously concern about what we would do as a district to support our students and families in that regard. So I'm sure that's probably some context around it. And then I know as far as just for the transgender student protections under the Parent Bill of Rights from the governor. I don't have much context around it, but I do know that this is something that to some degree has come up as we were talking about the mental health and wellness policy as it pertains to confidentiality, because this will require, and you can correct me on this, but this will require us to inform parents about if there's any changes or any concerns pertaining to a student's sexual identity or orientation. And so limiting us or providers or professionals from having that conversation. And so I know that there's a challenge as it pertains to kind of that mental health and wellness scope because according to our professional ethics, we have a requirement and responsibility to maintain and protect confidentiality unless there is imminent harm or danger. And so this would kind of serve as a direct conflict as it pertains to that. So I don't necessarily have from Dr. Moffat's perspective the areas that maybe she wanted to elevate, but I just know that that is a area of conversation for us, especially as it aligns with the mental health and wellness policy.
And then
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'd like to add in that I do think that we should definitely connect with President Moffat to see, what exactly did she want to kind of discuss, and even invite her to attend for the next meeting so that she can give her input or, provide us with the input and the clarity for the March meeting so that we are on the same page of what she's asking for or requesting or trying to seek out further, information moving forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Council, was there anything that you were preparing? There's no expectation on my end. Anything you wanted to say on either immigration or transgender?
Yeah, so on immigration, I'll take the immigration piece. I included just on the board docs 2 policies that are currently in effect and that we've been actively training our school staff on with respect to. There is a lot of concern, as you know, in the community and in the schools about how there could be increased immigration enforcement. So the 2 policies I wanted to point out to the board are 5111, which requires, as the law does, that CPS enroll students regardless of their immigration status. And so just to read from that policy, students who meet other enrollment criteria shall be admitted regardless of immigration status. It's not just the board's policy, that's the law. It's been the law since 1981, a Supreme Court case. It's based on the Constitution. It's not based on an executive order or an act of Congress. So we are not doing anything wrong by enrolling students regardless of their immigration status. We are required to by law and will continue to be. Because of that, so a training point that we've made to our schools, principals, assistant principals, clerks, is that immigration status is really irrelevant to us. And so when students and families enroll, we do not have a need, nor should we be asking for documents or other information about their immigration status. It's simply not a relevant piece of information as families enroll into schools. Third and last piece, and I attached one other policy, which is 5540. It's titled Interrogation of Students, but I think more generally it applies to law enforcement activities in school. And again, this is current board policy. It's been longstanding board policy. that the board's strong preference is that agencies should investigate alleged violations of the law off school property and outside of instructional time if at all possible. And that applies to criminal investigations, it applies to JFS investigations, it applies to immigration investigations, that our preference is to keep that out of the schoolhouse. There are exigent circumstances, particularly in JFS investigations, where the only way a JFS investigator is able to speak to a child who might be
And that,
being
that's,
harmed at home. Yeah.
that's Job and Family Services,
Job and
just
Family
people
Services,
who may not,
absolutely.
yeah.
That where that is the only place that kids can be interviewed. And in that case, what our policy says is that an adult has to remain in the room with the child. But across the board, our practice, policy, longstanding kind of way of going about things has been to urge law enforcement agencies to do any investigations outside of school. So that's how we've been training folks. We do feel that we have policies in place that address these, and that's what we've been training folks on. There are some school boards and others who have put in place much more specific policies that relate to immigration, but wanted you to know that we feel equipped to train folks even with our existing policies.
I appreciate the call out for the second policy that you mentioned as it pertains to interfacing with law enforcement and what our position and our stance is on that. So um, I don't know if there needs to be any mention anywhere else, but I do think that, like you said, we're covering the bases with already having policies in place. Recognizing that we support all of our students regardless of immigration status, as well as this is how we would move forward in the event that there was concern about their status.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. So what I have here is that we will slot both of the first two bullets there for March. And just invitation again, we have space, board members, if there is anything else that you would like us to take up in these 6 months. We don't need to, but we do have space for it. Mrs. Weinberg, would you like to talk about the third bullet? This is the House bills.
Yeah, I just wanted to have an update regarding any pertinent, House bills, any changes pertaining to the district, and I guess just alerting us so that we are in a place of transparency and having clarity to move forward. So that was just my ask from our lobbyists. So I'm not quite sure, were they able to attend? Were they able to give an update? Were they able to provide Dan anything?
So our lobbyists are not here today. Could ask them to come to a future meeting. Stephanie, and we included in the materials, Stephanie, and actually with some help from our intern as well, Sarah Buckley, we've put together a memo that's been shared with leadership, and Stephanie can talk about it, but it relates to some of the biggest impact bills that have recently been enacted in Ohio.
I'm sorry. And as you go through the memo, you'll see some of the effective dates for some of the policies. So I know, we tried to summarize kind of some of the bills coming up and their effective date or inactive dates in the memo. So I know one of the questions was around our transgender students and some of the bills that may be affecting those students, which would be included in the Parents' Bill of Rights, which the bill itself becomes effective in April, but the actual policy that we're required to adopt doesn't have to be in place until July 1st. So we're in the process still of just kind of reviewing our policies, seeing if there's any type of, what guidance we would do differently, so on and so forth. So, but just wanted to at least just provide a summary of what the bills, kind of their intentions are. So happy to answer any questions, but we tried to summarize all that we could, just as kind of an update.
Thank you so much on that. Can I just ask Board Member Lindy, what was exactly my ask? Because I thought that I had asked if we could have our lobbyists come to present or at least provide us an update. Can you remind me on what the ask was as of last month?
What
To
I
make sure
had,
that I'm on the same page as well.
yeah, what I had, Mrs. Weinberg, is that we would talk about that together today, and happy to do that. I think, this is just from my perspective, looking back over the last 5+ I guess years I've been here, there has been some confusion in the past about who the lobbyists report to. I'd like to make sure that we're getting updated information. I have no problem with them coming and presenting, but I would like to ask the superintendent what she would like to do with them because they report to her. And if they do come, I wanted us to have a conversation about, we don't give them instructions, because they're hired by the district, and the contract goes to the superintendent, not the board. My hunch is that that's consistent with everything you were imagining, and that we could set up a way that gets all of those things done. But that's part of the conversation I wanted us to have today.
No, that would be great. And whether it's maybe an assignment that I need to then make in our full board session, I just thought that I had requested that, but maybe I didn't. But I would love to have a perspective from their insight because they are actually, dealing with it each and every day. And so I just want to make sure that whatever is going down the pipeline, that we are up to standards and that we understand and know what we need to do from a
Yeah.
policy standpoint.
Yeah, and I think the next thing that should happen there is somebody just needs to ask the superintendent any concerns with them coming and sharing updates with the policy committee. I think you should feel totally, from my perspective, you should feel totally free to do that. And I can't imagine that you would say no. But then once we've got the superintendent's okay on that, I think having them come as available sounds great.
Okay, that would be great. And I can definitely work on that. And thank you.
Great. And it's like, I think it's a good topic, Mrs. Weinberg, because it's not like there are a small number of things happening. There's a very large number of things happening.
Absolutely.
And I think, I just think that, I would like to see us, to the extent that we can, become more proactive with what we're
Right.
trying to do in Columbus as opposed to reactive.
Right.
And I think that I am skeptical of our ability to do that well if their team is taking cues from the board, because we only meet once a month in this committee,
Yes,
twice
yes.
a month, the full board, and there are 7 of us, but reporting to one person who I think could plan ahead, we could hopefully get something that is more strategic and forward looking in place.
Absolutely. And so I just also wanted to thank Dan and Stephanie for the updates that they did provide. So thank you both.
I did want to speak to House Bill 206, and I do know it's on here for discussion, but since we're kind of going through some of those, or going through the conversation about these updated,
We have a very short agenda. I think you can go wherever you would like,
Okay.
wherever you would like, and we can finish early.
So I am curious, just in reading this, it says this law allows schools to create a policy authorizing the superintendent to expel a student for up to 180 days. So this is not saying that it has to be an absolute 180 days, because that would be basically a full school year, right? And the reason why I'm asking this, so it sounds like it's reading in terms of the superintendent has the discretion to determine how long, for whatever the infraction is, to make the determination about how many days they are suspended or from school or possibly expelled. And I'm asking this question because I'm thinking about just our lens and our focus on the restorative practice piece, and so how it would align with that. So I definitely think for these type of infractions, absolutely there needs to be consequences in place, right? Because the individual may be imposing imminent harm or danger or threat, but also how do we still align that restorative piece here? So I'm just trying to get more perspective from you all.
Well, I'll start, but Stephanie's been working on this also. So this is a new statute. It is a new, the first thing that would have to happen is the board would have to authorize the superintendent by changing board policy. So this is a new, it relates to a new ability to suspend or expel students for these specific actions. One thing we'll say is there is currently sort of a hole in the Ohio Revised Code and even in our own board policies with respect to the law says that you can suspend or expel for a period of up to a year for a firearm or for a bomb threat. Bomb threats are sort of that those happened in like the 80s and the 90s and the whatever. Sorry, do you need me to? Oh.
Okay.
The current thing that is sort of equally disruptive to a school environment is like a school shooting threat. And there has been some back and forth between school attorneys and attorneys representing students in discipline hearings saying that there is no ability under current law to suspend a student for a long period of time for a very disruptive school shooting threat. So that's one thing that this statute does is it updates the law to the kind of modern school environment. But the other thing it does is creates this new, possibly very lengthy suspension expulsion for a student. And so, yeah, the board is going to have to weigh in on whether we want to add that to the array of discipline consequences that could be administered to a student. We had hoped to get some feedback from the discipline committee, which is a committee that consists of teachers, administrators, principals, our PBIS crew. That's like folks who work for Manisha House, but also some outsiders. Elaine Fink from Legal Aid is on the committee. So this is a longstanding committee that has sort of advised the district on discipline matters, and they have this as an agenda item to talk about, and may get some perspective. They were supposed to talk about it last night, but I think the meeting was postponed. So that's to the extent the board is looking to hear some feedback from the discipline committee, we can offer that as well at some point.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
And I would just add that, again, this particular bill, again, is a board may adopt, so it
Okay.
is, we have the option
Option
of
to-
whether or not.
okay.
But again, it fills one gap, as Dan was explaining, as far as, kind of modernizing how we define a threat, but it does come with additional conditions. And so we tried to list that in the summary as well, because if you adopt the bill, then the conditions are not a may. The conditions are we must follow. So
Okay.
there's some additional requirements as far as like, assessment by a licensed psychologist. There's some conditions that have to be in place, and there's kind of even like a protocol and a procedure that we have to follow. So again, as Dan was saying, that those are some of the things that the board would probably want to weigh, because while we have the option to add this particular change, it does come with some additional
Really
requirements.
prescriptive.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
prescriptive. So some
Yeah.
additional
Yeah.
requirements that we currently wouldn't necessarily have to document as it's requested we do here.
Okay, this is really helpful feedback, and I'm hoping that it would be okay if the discipline committee did provide some updates or just conversation around how this is progressing. So if that is okay with everyone else, that is something that I would like to see.
Thanks.
Sounds great. So just taking stock of where we are, we've done the standing policy review items. We have talked through topics submitted by board members. We've done the last bullet on the continued discussion, new assignment items. Then we just got a handful of others.
We did the last two.
We did both of the last two. You are right. Look at that. We only have 3 left. Okay. Yeah, and then I think under other business there, I had asked Mr. Hoying if we might hear just a little bit about the dear colleague letter that came from the new administration in Washington about that whole set of issues at the end. Like, and we can, I can't imagine this will be the last time we talk about this, but we talk about it for a minute. Okay, so on 1240, Kendra, Mrs. Weinberg, you may remember last time we were trying to figure out what it was that Eve had wanted us to discuss when it came to 1240 in policy. I did have a chance to speak with her yesterday about what the concerns were. And so I wanted to bring those back. There is this section. I really appreciate whoever in if this is Stephanie, if this is Dan, if this is Phyllis, but whoever makes it so easy to find the policies on board docs when we're talking about them.
Mhm.
Who is that?
Kathy.
Well, and I just want to say thank you. Like it's very easy to navigate in these meetings to find the language that we want to look at. And I've been in a lot of meetings, and that's not always the case. And so I really just want to say thank you, and I appreciate that. So in 1240, there is in part 2, in the second paragraph, it says when in talking about the superintendent's goals that at minimum, these goals will include focus on improving opportunities for African American students, Latinx students, students of color, and low-income students. Eve had shared her concern with me that language can be alienating in some way to students who don't fit into some of those categories. She mentioned, for example, gay students, concerns about gender equity, transgender students, gifted students, and thought that the language we should have here should encourage us to set goals across the board, or leaving no students out, or in some way not over dialing on one and under dialing on another. So that was her concern. And that was the piece of language that she wanted us to look at. I know we talked explicitly about this in drafting this policy. And Kendra, you and Jim and I were of accord that it was important. We even rewrote it from the original version so that it would be the language that's in here. I have to say that from my perspective, I think the point that Eve is making is reasonable. Like, I don't think it's like without basis or weird in some way. I do happen to disagree with it. I think that you either, to do something other than this, I see two other options. You could put more groups in here, or you could have no groups in here. And I think the challenge with the more groups approach is the more goals you set, the harder it is to focus on any one of them. I think I've shared the story with this group before, but when I joined the board, the reports that we were getting from the superintendent, you had to print them on a legal sheet of paper in very small font just to fit all of the goals on one sheet of paper. And so I think this process of forcing focus is really important. And I think given the history of education in this country and in Cincinnati, this is a really important place for us to focus. It makes me worried about a version of the policy that has no group specified for similar reasons. So, like, I'm just one person. If the majority of my colleagues feel differently, we will suggest something else. But I wanted to hear what folks thought.
So I appreciate you for sharing Eve's perspective on this, and I do also recall us having very intense conversations in the policy meeting as well as with the full board. And just another point to add is that the other reason why we focused on this is because it aligns with our goals and our guardrails, and so we wanted to make sure that we were being strategic in elevating that. And also, we know that there are areas that we need to close our gaps for our students. And so I still stand by this language and making sure that we specifically call these areas out. Again, as we talked about, it's not to exclude, but at the same time, making sure that we're being targeted with the students that we recognize are having some of those challenges. And there also may be a lot of intersectionality as we're considering these students of focus. So I would still like to see it reading as such, because again, I think it strongly aligns with our goals and our guardrails. And so I want to make sure that we're honoring that. And I guess down the line, if the dynamics change, for said boards to change the policy, because maybe there's a certain focus area, I think that would be okay to do. But at this current time, I do think that it's helpful, considering that this is a huge population of our students. And as the data continues to reflect, we are really trying to work to improve the outcomes for these particular students in these categories.
And I think I would like to just add, you both really said some great things. I'm curious, did Vice President Bolton have any suggestions in terms of specific wording? And if she did, can that be shared? If she didn't, that's fine. I am still going to state that I agree with the verbiage as is. I think it definitely targets and hits the goals that we have stated. And I would be okay with leaving it as is. And I appreciate her for suggesting and wanting to include others. But I think in this particular goal, we want it to be very targeted and very specific. So I would be okay with sticking with the verbiage that we have currently.
Thanks, Mrs. Weinberg. I'm just making a note of that to make sure I share an update on this at our next board meeting.
And did she provide anything suggestions when she brought
She
this
did
topic
not.
up? Okay.
She did not. If I had to
Okay.
take my best guess based on what she was sharing, I think she would prefer that the language just come out rather than add something else in there.
Gotcha.
But Mrs. Weinberg, you're asking a good question, and I might be wrong. But I appreciate what you were saying about the way it's written.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that is the first bullet under continued discussions. We have second bullet, which is mental health wellness.
Yeah, so this is really just an update. So last Friday, we had the opportunity to meet to talk about the policy with several members that are providing support in several domains of mental health and social and emotional wellness. So I really want to say thank you to Stephanie and Dan for helping to facilitate this meeting. So we were able to connect with Ms. Brianka Gay, who is our lead school counselor, Ms. Naomi Medeiros, who is our lead school social worker. We received input from our community partner Mindpiece. We had Dr. Manisha House, as well as we had our lead school psychologist, Ms. Sarah English. And so it really helped to just create some robust discussion about how we are able to begin to organize the policy and really reflect from everyone's respective practice and scope, how this should work in terms of drafting the policy. And so really last week we were able to provide some organization and structure to just defining everyone's role, so everyone is aware of what each provider or support offers to our students and how they are a benefit and how they are a help to our students. And so that's really where we started. And so we still have some more work to do, but just wanted to give an update and just let you all know that it was such a great meeting. We were all able to be collaborative and just add that perspective to what will be helpful to supporting our students as well as our staff with the mental health and wellness policy. And Stephanie, if there's anything that you want to add, she was definitely helpful in organizing and changing language and documenting things within the draft. So I appreciate your support. And we were scheduled to have a meeting this week on, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday, but unfortunately I did have to reschedule the meeting.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to add to what Board Member Mapp was saying, as she just emphasized in the end, is we recognized as we were discussing the policy that the intention of the policy is for both students and staff. And so we wanted to make sure that we were doing both kind of sections of within our district a service by making sure we were addressing, because the needs of students would be slightly different from the needs of our staff and things of that nature. So then there were some sections where we were kind of we were combining it. And so having that call out that we needed to make sure that we were addressing staff needs as well, I thought was really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. And really what you all see on the screen, or what we've been discussing before, as I shared with the team, that was just literally a brain dump. Let's put all of our thoughts out right on paper, and then we can begin to work collaboratively to restructure and reorganize what we ultimately would want this policy to look like. And so again, it really yielded some very robust conversation. And so I look forward to being able to bring this back once we have a chance to meet again.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Phyllis, if you're watching a recording of this and putting the minutes together, if you could capture that for our next policy committee meeting next month. Okay, I think we're down to religious expression days, which I know we talked about last time a little bit, and we have an update.
Let me find that. I believe that again, this is one of the policies that did come out of recent legislation that each school is required to adapt a policy that reasonably accommodates the sincerely held religious beliefs and practices of our students. So the policy that we reviewed last month pretty much again came straight from the legislation, how it's in dictating the language that it wanted us to include, but specifically for these religious expression days, up to 3 days is what is required in regards to us being able to accommodate students as it relates to this particular legislation. And we keep referring to it that way is because we feel that, again, our current policies really already addressed, excused absences for students for bona fide religious days. So again, but the actual policy itself is required for us to have. And so this is more so for us to be in compliance of what, from a legal standpoint. But at the last meeting, we were asked to change kind of midway down that it reflect up to 3 days as opposed to the language that said not more than 3 days. And then also we added at the end, we wanted to just reiterate, because I think the question was try to define the difference between the two policies. And it's really difficult to do that because, again, we feel like we're already addressing this concern. So instead, we just added a sentence at the end of the policy, just basically saying that this would not prevent the district from approving students' absences for religious holidays as already provided in our board policy 5200 attendance. So again, so it doesn't limit us to these 3 days. If there was a need for more than 3, we have another policy that already addresses that. So hopefully that addressed the concerns from the last policy meeting. Were there any other questions about this one?
I know that most of these concerns were mine. I'm happy to go first unless Kendra or Mrs. Weinberg want to go. Yeah, no, I think, first of all, thank you. I think these changes completely address the issues that I was bringing up last time. I appreciate it. I think just for anybody who was not here last time or is watching this later and did not watch the first one, I think there are, to be sure, students in CPS who have a religious background that will involve more than 3 religious holidays that fall on CPS school days. Examples include, but are certainly not limited to, conservative and Orthodox Jews. And if that's the case, I don't want us to put in policy something that makes it look like we think you can't take those days off of school. And what I appreciate about the way that the council's team and Stephanie, thank you for doing this. I think it's written like the statute itself is confusing. And I appreciate you all pointing that out last time. I think this does what we can to keep it from being as confusing, inadvertently misleading for folks who are part of our community. So thank you. Kendra, anything on your end, or Mrs. Weinberg?
I don't have anything.
I have a question about something, and it doesn't necessarily relate to this, but in some aspects it does. So I know that there was as we were talking about the updates, the House bill updates, there was something in terms of language that was saying that we had to have a policy that would allow students to be excused to take maybe religious courses off-site. And I don't have all the specifics to it, so maybe you could speak to that. But I am curious to know, does that in any way impact what we have in policy here? I can't remember the House bill.
No, because in some ways we felt as though the religious expression days is really addressing things that we already have addressed in our current policy. So again, if a student has a bona fide religious reason to be excused from school, whether that be a religious holiday or an activity, we already have policies in place that allow them to be excused for that reason. So for the religious holidays, it's part of our attendance policy. And there's another one about the religious expression day. I'm looking it up right now, but there's a separate policy that talks about religious instruction outside of school. But
Okay.
again, so it's already addressed. So again, our intention is not to make it more difficult for
Mhm.
students to be excused for these reasons. And so that's why we've kind of added this additional
Okay.
language to make sure that remains the same. I mean, that's kind of been our policy and
Mhm.
practice of the school districts already.
Okay.
Does that answer
Mhm.
the question?
Yeah.
It's 5223 is the absences for religious instruction. I think the new requirements that you're talking about come from the Parents' Bill of Rights law, which is not yet effective. We don't need those policies in place until July. And we will check and double check this, but I believe the only thing the law changed there was that it used to be discretionary on the board as to have absences for religious instruction policy. Now it's mandatory.
Mandatory.
We do have one already, so I
Okay.
don't think there's changes needed, but we'll double check that before July 1 when we gotta have
Okay.
this in place.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Mrs. Weinberg, anything on your end?
I don't
Cool.
have,
So,
no, I don't have anything. Thank you for asking.
great. So then I think, Dan and Stephanie, this one's weird enough that I feel like we should list it separately.
Yep.
Is that okay? Okay. Any concerns? Like, so we'll put it through at the next board meeting, but list it. Second, please. Definitely okay to move forward. I'd like to list it not in the consent agenda. Thank you. Listen. Great. So we've got 1 done, 2 done, 3 done, 4 done. I believe, Rob, we're at hearing of the public. Do we have any speakers? We have an in-person person. Great.
Hi, good morning. My name is Michelle Dunn with the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers. And I just wanted to speak to the issue of state, or actually add into the discussion the impact of federal education policy as it relates to Cincinnati Public Schools. Some of you may have heard that the current administration in the federal government is considering eliminating the Department of Education. They've also I know a letter was sent to the district, I believe, about DEI language. Federal law now prohibiting covered entities from using race in any decisions pertaining to admission, hiring, promotion, compensation, financial aid, scholarship, prizes, administrative support, discipline, housing, graduation ceremonies, and all other aspects of student, academic, and campus life. This covers K through 12 as well. I know it's not fully implemented, but if it were to become implemented, the discussion you had about the superintendent's evaluation, for example, could be an example. The federal government could say you are using considerations of race in promotional considerations. It's a warning to say these discussions are happening at the federal level. I think it would be wise to ask the lobbyists to not only advise the board and the community on how to grapple with or respond to state laws, but also what we're hearing from the federal government, of course, because this could impact our access to title and IDEA funds, federal funds that we rely on in our district. It's so unfortunate that we have to take this up, but it could actually really happen and have a real impact on our practices and policies as we operate as a district. And I would just say that the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers is keeping a close eye on all federal and state laws as well. We track what's going on. We have lobbyists through our Ohio Federation of Teachers and others, our American Federation of Teachers, who are really going to the mat, both in litigation and beyond, to fight back against what we see is really anti-public education policy. I just want to mention March 4th is a National Day of Action for Public Education. It's in its formative stages right now. We're planning something. You might have been around a few years ago when we did a walk-in, which was like, we love our public schools walk-in. We're imagining maybe something similar. So we haven't talked to the superintendent yet or anything. It's a very kind of grassroots driven national action to kind of show support, and also to say we don't want our Department of Education to be dissolved. We rely on their important support, and to kind of engage community and parents around these federal decisions around our schools. So I just wanted to mention those couple things. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. And Rob, you said no online speakers. Okay, great. On that issue, Dan and I had chatted yesterday just about the Dear Colleague letter that came out from the feds. I know there's only one piece of that bigger picture, but do you want to share any perspective you want to share?
Sure, and I have copies if others want to see it. Obviously, we're monitoring it closely also. I think at its core, the letter says that, put simply, I mean, I'm quoting, educational institutions may neither separate or segregate students based on race, nor distribute benefits or burdens based on race. And we don't, and haven't, and work hard to avoid discriminating or having disparate benefits based on race. I'm not sure that's exactly the way the administration viewed their the author of this letter thought of it. I think probably more concerning is the piece that says that DEI programs, in their view, deny students the ability to participate fully in the life of a school. I think that's a harder case to make, and I assume the administration will be making it, but at this time, we've not changed any of our board policies. We've not been directed to change any of our board policies, and we are following all of our board policies. So,
And I appreciate that. I do have a perspective on this, and I'm just one person. But I think that absent some seismic change in law, I don't understand how the current administration could accurately deprive us of federal funding for any of the things that CPS is currently doing. And so my perspective is we should continue to do the things that we think are the right things to do for children. And if we wind up in court, we wind up in court. But I am not inclined to make changes of any kind, given the Dear Colleague letter. Like, nor am I inclined to like pass a whole bunch of new things to go pick a fight, because I think we've put care and thought and intention into the equity policy, into the anti-racism policy, into the part of the superintendent's eval policy that we wrote, into lots of other things we have here. I sleep well at night on that front. And if people feel differently, I'm very open, but would curious what other board members think.
Yeah, you shared my sentiments exactly. So I don't disagree with what you've stated.
And I'm just
Mrs.
gonna
Weinberg?
agree.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
And I have the same feelings as well.
Great. So that was easy. I'm sure that's the only time we'll hear about this over the course of the next 6 months to a year. Okay, I have no other business. Does anyone else have any other business or anything that we are missing? Okay. Having no other business before us,